Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 15th chapter of Inheritance, written by A is for Amy 71 on AO3. Izuku has just done the Eat This. Let's see how this unfolds after the trigger warnings. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. The road with One for All starts off a bit bumpy. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 15. The real training actually didn't start as planned. After the first punch to try out One for All, Izuku winced when his father put a hand on his shoulder. Ow! He complained, stepping away. Izuku? Sir asked with concern at the same time as his dad asked, Zu? My arm hurts, he said, rolling his shoulder a bit. That was one heck of a punch, All Might conceded. Gran stepped forward to unlace the gloves, and Izuku yelped when the right one was pulled off. Take your shirt off, kid, Gran ordered. Izuku reached for the hem of his hoodie and groaned in pain as he lifted it up. His father caught hold of the fabric and helped to ease it over his head, while Izuku hissed. As the fabric peeled away, all four men sucked in a breath at the sight of Izuku's arm. It was bruised a dark purple from the tips of his fingers all the way up to his shoulder, where it had faded to a lighter shade of purple, then blue, then yellow, before ending around his shoulder blade. How did this happen? His dad demanded, sounding both panicked and angry. It must have been some backlash from using the quirk at full force, All Might guessed, looking concerned and apologetic. Gran carefully examined the abused limb, and said it didn't seem to be broken, just really badly bruised. The power gets stronger with each person that holds it, so perhaps it's more amplified than Izuku can handle at full strength, All Might said. We should take him to the clinic to be looked at, just in case, Sir said. I don't want this happening again, his father told the men, thick as smoke billowing up from his mouth and nose. I'm entrusting him to your care so that he'll be safe, not so he can end up turned to a bloody pulp. Understood, sir, All Might said, bowing to Izuku's dad. Izuku's eyes widened, and he fidgeted in distress. He'd never seen his dad emit so much smoke so often than he had in the past week. Dad, it's not his fault. It's all right, young man. I promised your father that I would take excellent care of you, and the first time you use One for All, this happens. I will have to be much more careful in the future. The car is being brought around, Sir said, pocketing his phone. Gran appeared with the biggest ice pack Izuku had ever seen. It was more like an ice blanket. He wrapped it around Izuku's whole arm, and there were still several centimeters hanging past his fingertips. Gran said it was one that had been made especially for All Might, whose large frame required large equipment. The doctor at the clinic easily accepted the explanation that Izuku had inherited a new quirk that he hadn't gotten used to. She had treated him before and knew his quirk history. An even dozen now, she said cheerfully as she used her X-ray quirk to check him for any breaks or fractures. Izuku gave her a weak smile that got a little brighter when she announced no need for a cast or a brace. She gave him a sling to rest his arm in, some analgesic cream to rub on it, and some painkillers. Those were to help him sleep more comfortably for a couple days until the pain subsided enough to get relief from over-the-counter medicine. In the end, they put any training on hold for a week, and Izuku was told to keep a journal of any changes he noticed, physically or otherwise, in the meantime. At school on Monday was when he had his first mishap. His pen rolled off his desk and onto the floor, landing just out of reach. He didn't see the harm in using pull in getting it back, since his arm was in a sling. He held out his hand toward it and pulled, but instead of his own pen hitting his hand, there was a tearing sound, a yelp of surprise, and suddenly Izuku was holding the teacher's pen. Unfortunately, it had come to him through his teacher's shirt pocket, tearing a pen-sized hole in it in the process. The class roared with laughter as Izuku blushed beet red and jumped up to return the pen and bow a few thousand times in apology. "Stupid Deku!" Kachan laughed. Izuku sighed, knowing his detention was well-deserved. The next day, Izuku began floating up out of his seat while working on a math assignment. When his knees hit the underside of his desk, the desk lifted up off of the ground as well, falling with a loud clatter as he got it under control. The short fall back into his chair painfully jolted his arm, and he gritted his teeth as everybody stared. He avoided detention when he was asked to stay after class by explaining that a new quirk was making his other ones act up. The teacher had shuddered, as if he'd forgotten about the nature of Izuku's quirk, and dismissed him. He found himself accidentally changing the colour of one of All Might's action figures, and lamented that he couldn't turn it back. In class, he accidentally used his copy quirk while passing papers back in his row of desks, ruining the handouts. It now seemed he could copy an entire stack at once, and not just one page at a time. The rest of the week wasn't too bad, and the bruising on his arm responded well to ointments, icing, and rest. His arm was a molted mass of spectacular colours, but the pain was tolerable, and he didn't have to wear his sling past the first week. When he presented Sir Night-Eye with his journal pages that were extremely sloppy as he had trouble writing with his injured hand, and his left hand was even worse for writing skill, it earned him an eyebrow raise. It would appear that One for All is affecting some of your other quirks. It's worth exploring just how much. This meant that while his arm continued to heal, he was put through his paces with his other quirks all over again, to see how applying One for All affected their potency. Pull had obviously gotten stronger. The size and weight of the objects he could call to him hadn't changed all that much, but the distance and speed were vastly improved, so much so that Izuku had to be careful not to hurt himself when catching small objects. The coin he'd pulled from across the room had definitely stung when it smacked into his palm with an audible slap. His levitation quirk sometimes took him by surprise and caused him to lift off the ground from time to time, usually when his mind was wandering. His previous training helped him to get it back under control quickly, but All Might thought he might be able to learn to use it as a sort of gliding flight, if combined with his balance quirk and One for All leap. All Might could travel long distances with such leaps even without levitation, so it stood to reason that if he did the same while levitating, he could go much further, and possibly faster. That was a tricky one to monitor though, so it might have to wait to test out until they found someone who could keep up with him and rescue him if things went awry. Turning transparent didn't really change much. He got slightly more transparent, but not quite enough to say he was mostly invisible. It could be good for stealth missions if he could train to hold his breath for extended periods. Things still slid off his skin, but not any better than before, and he still knew what people wanted to eat at any given time, but couldn't tell what they'd want tomorrow, or if they were far away. He didn't improve any with being a polyglot either, though it would have been cool to be able to read or write in different languages without any work on his part. Finally, they called back Hound Dog, who had agreed to let Izuku experiment, and it seemed that a single touch from Izuku could now make the hair on the hero's head grow several centimeters instead of needing several strokes to get it that long. Hound Dog had been delighted, and said he was going to get a makeover with his new hair. Izuku grinned at that, glad he could help. Once his arm was healed, All Might asked him to meet him at a stretch of beach near a run-down shopping district called Takaba Municipal Beach Park. Izuku could tell that it had once been a thriving spot for locals to hang out at, but had deteriorated over the years. Once he found the beach, it was clear why. "Where did all this trash come from?" he asked in dismay. "Careless people dumped here, and the currents tend to draw waste tossed into the ocean to this beach, where it washes ashore," All Might said, looking almost cheerful. "Why is that a good thing?" "Because it means you'll always have plenty to do," All Might said in his booming voice before a coughing fit overcame him and he deflated. "You're going to bulk up those muscles by hauling all of this junk out of the sand and cleaning the beach. I'm thinking that maybe the reason your arm bruised that badly is because One for All binds the strength of all the previous holders into a single person. That's a lot for such a small body to contain. Bulking you up may help with that." "This could take months," Izuku said in disbelief. "Possibly more than a year, even," All Might agreed without concern. Izuku guessed that made sense, and he wasn't about to tell All Might that he didn't trust him. He took the work gloves that were offered and started small. All Might actually helped with the regular trash, papers and plastics that didn't weigh enough to give either of them a workout of any kind. While they gathered bag after bag of light rubbish, All Might regaled Izuku with tales of his early years, training with Gran, what it had been like to be quirkless as a kid. It wasn't so uncommon then, and how the heroes of today seem to have forgotten their roots. "It's not all about fame and adulation, young Midoriya," he said as he handed off another bag to be tossed in the back of a flatbed truck in the parking lot. "Heroes should be about community involvement, getting to know the local business owners when they can, volunteering for the betterment of the area you serve, like we're doing right now." Izuku agreed with that philosophy. He had seen a couple of heroes come and go from the spotlight, looking great and powerful at first, but more interested in the rankings and photo ops than in saving people and helping out. He vowed to never be like that. He wanted to be as great as All Might one day, but not for the popularity or praise. He wanted to save people and keep them from ever having to lose a loved one like he'd lost his own mother. He never wanted to gain another quirk, if he could help it. At the end of their first day at the beach, it was hard to tell that anyone had done any work at all, if Izuku was honest with himself, despite the dozens of trash bags they'd filled. The place still looked more like a landfill than a beach park. "Here," All Might said, handing him a sheaf of notes. Izuku was careful to tug on his lighter-weighted gloves so as not to touch them with all 5 fingers on either hand as he scanned the pages. "All-American Dream Plan?" he read aloud, looking at lists of exercises, foods, and schedules. "Precisely! We've only got a couple of years to get you ready to face the board of directors for UA High School." "Why would I meet the board of directors?" Izuku asked, feeling confused. "They're the ones who will decide if you'll be able to be placed as a recommendation student," All Might told him, sounding as though that should have been obvious. Izuku's mind was reeling with this new information. "There are only 2 recommendation spots for each class each year, and the criteria to even qualify is crazily complicated." "Which is why we need to get you in tip-top shape," All Might said confidently. "The recommended students meet the board, sit for the written exam, and then give a demonstration of their quirk skill and their mental and physical fitness." "You think I can qualify?" Izuku asked hopefully. "I know you can! came the immediate answer. If you work for it. Izuku wasn't sure how many people got recommended each year for UA, but it was possible that the number of recommendations was higher than the number of available spots. That was why they met earlier than the actual entrance exam date. If a recommended student didn't win one of the spots, they could still sit for the regular entrance exam and earn a spot that way. Izuku wasn't about to let everyone helping him and cheering for him down. He would work hard and keep focused on his goal, whatever it took. On his way home, he stopped at the market to buy groceries that would help him get started on the meal plan that was included in the lists that All Might made for him, and vowed to follow them to the letter. His classmates noticed he was looking more tired lately, and asked about it. "I've got a personal trainer that's working me hard," he answered, not wanting to let the truth slip too much. "You know, 'cause my quirks have been acting up." "Sounds rough," the other boy said sympathetically. It was rough, but Izuku was loving every minute of it. Well, mostly every minute of it. Some of the stuff he found on the beach was beyond disgusting, and All Might didn't help him again after that first day. Still, his already fit body was becoming even more defined and muscular instead of just toned. He didn't seem to be gaining a lot of bulk, but he had just started. On top of the daily beach cleanup, Izuku's schedule had him meeting with either All Might, Sir Nightai, or Gran Torino twice a week for other lessons, which turned out to be different each time. Gran almost always taught him fighting, often street style with few rules. He insisted that Izuku needed to know how to fight dirty, because villains sure as hell wouldn't be following a rule book. Sir and All Might argued that they had to be better than that, but Gran found ways to throw in little pointers here and there that he was sure wouldn't be allowed in anything but a knockdown, drag-out brawl. Often it was about boxing, looking for an opponent's openings, and taking advantage of weaknesses. To that end, Sir Nightai helped him continue practicing judo, which had been abandoned because of circumstances, but was useful enough to keep in his repertoire. He also often went over Izuku's hero notebooks, the ones that had become legible over time anyway, and pointed out any flaws or incorrect assumptions in his thinking. He demanded that he memorize the different types of quirks, and the best ways to counter them with what he already knew and had at his disposal. He continued to pose hypothetical scenarios and demands that Izuku find the most expedient and ethical solutions to them. He insisted that more than fighting, it was best to think one's ways out of sticky situations and outsmart the enemy. All Might wasn't the best teacher. He was, however, very enthusiastic. One for All had come so naturally to him that he was baffled as to why Izuku was having as much trouble as he was. They worked on how and when he should use it, since it seemed to take precious seconds for Izuku to call it forth and be ready to use it. Even then, he sometimes fizzled out mid-leap or punch or kick, leading to a big wind-up with little reward at the end. It was unclear if it was a matter of poor concentration or being distracted, or if there was some kind of loose connection somewhere, where his other quirks were somehow interfering. Many of their sessions together were spent working to combine One for All with his other quirks in various inventive ways. All Might was still doing hero work for a handful of hours each day, but had begun leaving the big jobs for other heroes to handle. He only got involved in something that would strain him if there appeared to be no other option to prevent a loss of life. Because of his transition to less time on the streets, the crime rate had started to rise a little, mostly with the small-time criminals testing the waters, looking to fill in the spaces where All for One no longer held influence. The fact that rumours said All Might had been the one to take down All for One still kept the major players on the crime scene in line, and well hidden. The media speculated wildly about All Might's diminished time on the hero scene. Gossip blogs speculated that he had met someone and was settling down into a more domestic life. Reporters and analysts gave wing to wild conspiracies from the internet about the number one hero living a double life, which wasn't exactly wrong until they started giving their theories about it that were nowhere near close. Interviews with other heroes turned up no clues, with most of them shrugging and saying that the man had basically been on duty for decades and deserved a break if he wanted one. Everyone had a theory, but only a handful of people knew the truth. Sir was concerned that things would get out of control before Izuku could make it through UA. His plan had been to have Izuku graduate, then begin a short stint as All Might's sidekick, eventually taking over so that All Might could retire for good. He insisted that he was working on some things to buy some time, and explained the number one's decreased presence on the streets. Something much less crazy than the rabid media was putting out there. Time began to move quickly, and the beach was starting to look less and less like a landfill. Gran had taken up a hobby he liked to call sneak attack and would often show up out of nowhere trying to take Izuku by surprise while he was hauling large appliances or something similar. Sir thought that this was a fine way to keep Izuku on his toes and had joined in. In a more subtle way, Sir would throw his hyperdensity seals at the towers of refuse, causing them to teeter or even collapse, forcing Izuku to evade or attempt to stop a minor catastrophe at a moment's notice. Izuku would never know when they would show up and only knew they were there when he was already under attack. All Might thought it was hilarious. All Might spent most of his time in his diminished form now, and had started calling it his true form when he spoke about it. He saved every ounce of energy and strength he had left for the times he took up the mantle of the number one hero, doling out the power in small increments to make it seem like he was more active than he really was. Izuku wasn't sure how to feel about it. On one hand, it was a very smart way of thinking, and a good way to cover how little time he actually got to spend crime fighting. On the other hand, it had to be hard for him to not be able to easily do what he'd always done, as much as he wanted. School was school. Izuku had a lot of friendly acquaintances, but kept mostly to himself. He didn't join any more clubs or extracurricular activities. He couldn't really become close with anyone his own age, since he was always with one of the trio of men who were training him. It would be hard to explain all of his covert comings and goings and a lack of free time to anyone. On top of that, could he really trust anyone right now? The one real hangout with outside of school friend he'd had in his life had been Kachan, and that had ended poorly. They had an unsteady truce in middle school, but it was clear that Kachan still held him in disdain. It didn't hurt anymore when he was ignored. It was better than being noticed too much and having to answer questions. He didn't bother to try and make other friends. Anyone else could be a plant, couldn't they? How could he know who was trustworthy? Better not to risk it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. This week has been strange to say the least. My father came out of hospital and he is on the mend, but it really did put some things in perspective. A chapter that has less dialogue is always a treat, and I love being able to get a glimpse into Izuku's mind through the narration. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction, A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribed to the channel, and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah.